each. Mr. Barrett, you have the first slot.
Ms. Hogan, we got a shocking response to a question from my colleague, Mr. Perkins, from your office. Are you able to confirm that the total amount of money that was handed out by SDTC in cases of conflicts of interest is more than $250 million? It's $336 million.
So I'd like to just provide a bit of clarity to the figures. So there were 96 cases of conflict of interest that we believed were managed well, where board members recused themselves from the vote. Those were linked to $259 million of funding. Then there were 90 cases, as we noted in the audit, where there was conflict of interest that were not properly managed, where individuals who had declared a conflict of interest continued to be involved in the discussion and then vote. Those were linked to $76 million of funding. Why you can't just add the two up is some of the funding appears in both buckets. So it isn't just a case of adding the two numbers, but it represents a total $319 million.
$319 million in the cases of the conflicts of interest. Thank you very much. Mr. Kennedy, when was the minister or his staff first informed about any of the findings of the RCGT report? The date, please, sir.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm looking at the chronology here. The minister was briefed on the results of the fact-finding exercise and the next steps on the 27th of September 2023, and there's a briefing note that would have been my office would have provided him to support that discussion.
So, prior to end September, you never discussed any findings at any stage of the RCGT report with the minister or his staff before that formal briefing at the end of September?
I spoke, so Mr. Chair, we received the confidential file from the complainant on the 16th of February. We briefed the minister shortly thereafter on the fact that we had received this binder and of the proposal to conduct this review using a third-party audit firm. Then the review kind of unfolded between sort of early March and late September, when the minister was briefed on the findings, in late September on the date that I noted. But certainly I would have let him know the review was continuing and so on. You know, I meet the minister regularly, so I would have maybe orally let him know that the RCGT was continuing its work. But the briefing on the findings, Mr. Chair, was the 27th of September, 2023.
You know, we heard from your CFO that there were multiple discussions in June, and then prior to the September date, that the minister was read in on it. So you agree with Mr. McConaughey's statements that the minister had been read in on the status of the RCGT report, not at the end of September, but in fact in June?
I would have, as part of normal practice, kept the minister apprised of the fact that the audit work was continuing. We had, and again, I believe this is a matter of record, but we had received a preliminary assessment from RCGT on their work, and we actually amended the contract for them to do additional field work. That was in early June. So there were kind of multiple rounds with RCGT right, where we asked them to go back and do additional work. But as I say, the results were presented to the minister on the 27th of September.
On the 15th of September, SDTC says that you told them there would be no further investigation and they should consider suspending funding. So you made the decision on the 15th prior to briefing the minister in full to that effect. That wasn't the minister's call, that was yours?
There were a couple of, there are two things, Mr. Chair, I think happening here at the same time. One is that there's the work that RCGT was doing and the dates I've noted, Mr. Chair. And the second was SDTC, the way they normally operate, this is my layperson's description, they have a kind of a regular funding cycle where they do reviews of projects and they make funding awards. When I spoke to the organization, I advised them that it would be unwise to kind of continue business as usual.
So that was your decision?
Well, it was really SDTC's decision to kind of suspend. At this point, the minister hadn't issued a formal stop order, but it was advice that they have a board meeting coming, and it's like you may wish to delay decision-making because the audit report is almost final. We'll be talking to the minister, and,
So,
you
so
don't
I'm
want
running short on time, sir.
Sorry.
The findings were produced by our CGT in May. The study was extended. Did you make that decision, or did the minister make the decision?
That would have been made by me. It would have been the department's decision to extend that.
So the findings were enough for ISED to discuss an action plan, including a new office of a director general level to deal with it, but that never materialized. Who made the decision, and on what date was the decision to extend? Because you didn't brief the minister, you said, until June. These seem like pretty advanced decisions for the minister to not weigh in on.
I'm not sure, Mr. Chair, I understand. I'll try to answer. We had RCGT doing audit work. The audit work clearly, picked up that there might be issues. We wanted them to do additional field work so we would know, we would have a definitive assessment to present to the government. When we were getting closer to the final report being ready for presentation to the government, we also were working on our management response and action plan, which I can make available to the committee. I believe it's a matter of public record, but that was the actual response to the audit. What would we do in response to these findings that were problematic?
Thank you very much. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
So I just wanted to take a second to circle back to one of the questions from the previous round, Madam Auditor General, with respect to files that have been ordered by the House to be transmitted by the law clerk to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Now, this is, I think that function, first of all, is important to highlight, that's the law clerk's role here, is to serve as the conduit for those files to make that travel. This isn't a direction to the Auditor General on what to audit. It's like any bill that comes through the House that receives a majority support. The documents and data that were used by you to reach the conclusions that you did with respect to millions of dollars. We had 336. Sorry, I think you said $319 million was the number involved in cases of conflict of interest. Some were declared, some were undeclared, but all of that money went to appointees' interests that were involved with SDTC. The only reason that this step is necessary is because after 9 years of the NDP Liberal government, we have complete absence of transparency, a refusal to be transparent with Canadians. And it's not just files from the Auditor General. Of course, we need files from Sustainable Development Technology Canada, but also files from ISED. And so our hope is that, we know that the record keeping at the Auditor General's office is excellent. We haven't seen that evidenced by the departments that you've audited. So my question, Mr. Kennedy, is are you collecting documents and prepared to transmit them to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police?
Mr. Chair, I can certainly confirm we are doing that, and we are moving expeditiously to do that.
Mr. Perkins, you've got just over 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions for the Auditor General. Thank you for your report on sustainable development technologies that was released last week. Better known colloquially to those who are watching as the Liberal Green Slush Fund. 186 transactions approved by the board were approved by directors who had a conflict of some sort, declared, undeclared, maybe didn't follow the conflict of interest guidelines, correct?
I wouldn't say it's 186 transactions. Sometimes there may have been many conflicts for one transaction. That's why we said it was 96 cases and 90 cases.
Those
it doesn't mean
cases.
90 different projects.
Okay. So
I don't know if that helps you understand.
So it's not 186 out of 420 projects you reviewed?
No, the cases of conflict of interest, there could be many conflicts of interest with one project.
I can see why Canadians and everyone is confused about this, because it appears that even the department and the government, who had an ADM in the meeting every time, didn't clearly understand. And that totals, as you said, 319 million of 820 million, 856 million. Yes. Sorry, 856 million, which is about 40, somewhere around 40% of the money allocated in the period you audited was conflicted in some way.
Yes, there was a conflict of interest, either well-managed or not well-managed, linked to
Correct.
the funding decision.
Correct,
yes.
thank you. And in addition to that, there was another 58 million, I don't know if maybe there was overlap, another 58 million that, in the fund that did not meet the contribution agreements, which included, I believe, the COVID payments.
Yeah, that 58 million was funding that didn't follow the process outlined in the contribution agreement, where it should have been project by project based on merit. These were really these batch approvals that should
And they
not
only
have-
get the $1 billion. These Liberal appointees only got the $1 billion in order to follow the contribution agreement. They didn't have freedom to go outside the contribution agreements.
The contribution agreement was supposed to dictate how funding decisions were
Right.
made and where the money went.
Right,
yes.
so they went outside of that. So there's 319 million conflicted, another 58 million that went outside the contribution agreements. So almost $400 million of $859 million of this board approval, these Liberal appointees, were not complying generally with either normal governance practices in not doing business with the company that you are governing, or outside of the rules that Parliament and ISED set up for the organization in allocating the $1 billion for them to invest.
If I may, the funds, there will be some overlap again. That 58 million, some of it is already included in those that have conflicts of interest. I can ask the team to try and narrow down for you. We may not get to it through the meeting, but if we can, we'll give you the right number.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.